So episode 1 I have dubbed the new big man of crime. Basically in this episode, Wilson Fisk is introduced, and obviously the Kingpin being the new big man of crime. The reason he has stepped back in the past 2 seasons and hasn't showed his face is because he was letting all the other big men of crime, aka Dr. Octopus, Tombstone, Hammerhead, Silvermane and so on, fight it all out to be the crime lord of New York, and once they had all cancelled each other out, Wilson Fisk has come to the forefront and is now ready to reign upon New York. So basically Wilson Fisk only has one thing in his way of ruling New York, and that is obviously Spider-Man. So he sends Shocker out to fight Spider-Man. Shocker is obviously then defeated and is sent back to prison. Now, on the Oscorp side of things, obviously, Norman Osborn was revealed to be the Green Goblin all along for the first 2 seasons at the end of Season 2. Basically, Donald Mencken now becomes the new CEO of Oscorp, as basically it does fall to him. Although Norman and Donald Mencken did have some sort of a rivalry come the end of Season 2, Donald Mencken tries to basically become the CEO, and he is successful. Harry is dealing with his father's death and does not like Donald whatsoever, because obviously he basically thinks of him as a replacement for his father, and basically he thinks that his father cannot be replaced. Harry is on this constant downfall throughout the season, and we'll see that come later in the finale. Michael Morbius is also introduced, which does introduce a possible vampire storyline. Episode 2 is the second episode in the Wilson Fisk arc, and basically Matt Gargan is now brought in by Fisk to destroy Spider-Man. If you guys don't remember, Matt Gargan did make an appearance in the final episode of Season 2 of Spectacular Spider-Man, when Norman Osborn did say the check will be in the mail to Matt Gargan on the phone. I imagine Matt Gargan in the Spectacular Spider-Man series to be someone who is basically not very wealthy. He needs money. So basically he goes to Wilson Fisk, who is hiring people to be test subjects on a new experiment. Mac then obviously does become the Scorpion. So Wilson Fisk sends Matt Gargan out, aka the Scorpion, to destroy Spider-Man. Once again, he needs Spider-Man out of the picture. Spider-Man in the process does learn of the Kingpin, but does not learn it is Wilson Fisk just yet. Scorpion goes to jail, and Michael Morbius is recruited as an Oscorp intern because he has got very special talents in neogenic science. Now, after episode 2, which I did dub Sting of the Scorpion, episode 3 rolls around, and that is called The City of Carnage. Basically, the Venom symbiote does reproduce, just like in the comics, and basically the Carnage symbiote is born. Now, basically, if you guys didn't know, obviously Eddie Brock and the symbiote both survived in Season 2, and Cletus Cassidy, who was introduced in Season 2, now becomes Carnage, and Venom is in this episode as well. Basically, Venom and Carnage team up to take down Spider-Man. And obviously Carnage will go on his little killing spree and will go a little bit insane. Episode 4 rolls around, which is the second part in this symbiote arc, and I have dubbed this episode War of the Symbiotes. So Venom then disagrees with Carnage and his methods. Even Venom thinks Carnage is going a little bit too far and is forced to team up with Spider-Man to take him down. Carnage is ultimately defeated, and then Venom wants to go off on his own and promises that he will not terrorize New York and will leave Spider-Man alone, as they're at a mutual agreement. Spider-Man knows this is wrong, and Spider-Man and Venom have one last final brawl. The Venom symbiote is destroyed forever after this. Spider-Man cannot let Eddie Brock become Venom anymore. Episode 5 rolls around, and I have dubbed this episode Return of the Six Part 1. So basically in this episode, the Kingpin has come back to the forefront of the series and puts together the Sinister Six. The Kingpin has a rivalry with Dr. Octopus, who is the leader. The Sinister Six battle Spider-Man in this episode, but ultimately get away when Spider-Man does defeat them. Next we have episode 6, which is dubbed Return of the Six Part 2. The Sinister Six do battle Spider-Man once again in this episode. Spider-Man actually does learn in this episode that Wilson Fisk is actually the Kingpin. After learning this information, Spider-Man obviously does expose Wilson Fisk, and Fisk is ultimately arrested. Next we go on to episode 7, which is titled Vengeance. Because Fisk is in jail, Tombstone actually does return. And we do know Tombstone was actually the big man of crime way back in Season 1 and 2. So basically Tombstone did get back out of jail in Season 2, obviously he made bail, and Tombstone wants revenge on Spider-Man. He's solely focused on just destroying Spider-Man because he was the one who messed up his whole big man of crime in the first place. Tombstone fights Spider-Man but loses. Tombstone ultimately does go to jail for good this time. This time Tombstone is in jail. This is a 1 episode arc, but also it does fit into the Wilson Fisk story arc as well. Now we go on to episode 8, and episode 8 will be a part of a big story arc which will last all the way to episode 13, the finale. So episode 8 I have called Lost Lineage. So basically, if you guys didn't know, there was a storyline that was confirmed for Spectacular Spider-Man Season 3, which did have Peter's parents have a little bit of a story, and basically this is how I have incorporated it. So in episode 8, Lost Lineage, this is going to be a story about how Peter's parents did in fact die. Peter actually does learn that his dad was responsible for him getting the spider powers. As we do know in the comics, Norman Osborn and Richard Parker and a couple of other people were responsible for Peter Parker getting the abilities of a spider. And basically Peter learns this, and obviously this is how we incorporate a Peter's parents story into the Spectacular Spider-Man Season 3. Then obviously the end of the episode, or maybe in the middle of the episode, Donald Mencken is actually going to recreate the Spider Serum because he sees that Spider-Man is actually got these powers, and somehow he learns that that was due to an Oscorp field trip, and he's actually a teenager. I don't know how Donald Mencken's going to piece that together. Maybe a bit of a plot hole there, but still they could try and piece it up. But Peter does actually learn that Oscorp are actually trying to recreate it at this point, as Donald Mencken is in charge. Now, a reason Donald Mencken would try to recreate the serum that give Spider-Man his powers is maybe because he's running out of projects. There's no other real scientists there to really help him. Obviously, Dr. Octavius isn't a scientist there anymore, neither is Adrian Toomes, and Norman Osborn isn't there to overlook the company, so Donald Mencken is going to have to try and do something with it, and he will reopen the Spider project. So going into episode 9, which I have dubbed The Living Vampire, Michael Morbius obviously was introduced in episode 1 and now has gone on to be one of the leading scientists on the recreation of the Spider Serum. Michael Morbius perfects the serum, or at least he thinks he has, but then turns himself into a living vampire. Morbius then obviously fights Spider-Man as he needs blood and goes around and starts killing people. Morbius obviously does then go to jail, and Spider-Man starts to have suspicions on Donald Mencken, obviously because he's the CEO of Oscorp. Why would they try to recreate the Spider Serum that obviously his father did create? It's a bit of a weird situation. Episode 10 rolls around, and I've dubbed this episode A Goblin's Descent. So basically, in this episode, Donald Mencken blames Spider-Man for the downfall of Oscorp. So ultimately, Donald Mencken becomes the Hobgoblin to fight Spider-Man. Spider-Man beats Hobgoblin, and Donald Mencken is sent to prison, obviously being revealed as the Hobgoblin. And also, I must say that it was actually confirmed that the Hobgoblin would be in Season 3 or 4 of Spectacular Spider-Man. And also, once again, like Season 2, Harry goes missing again. Obviously, he's on a constant downfall through the season. Episode 11 rolls around, and I've dubbed this Prowler Into the Night. So basically, this is going to be a one-off standalone episode. It's going to be like in between the stories, as like a lot of the characters from episode 10 gather again and together and just, set up the last 2 episodes. This episode's going to be practically about just developing characters, developing storylines further, and also Hobie Brown will become the Prowler, and we can tell the Prowler story. I'm sure most of you guys know what the Prowler story is, and obviously because this show did go on before Miles Morales actually did become Spider-Man, we can't really have the Aaron Davis as the uncle of Miles Morales. It'd be really, really cool, and I was actually thinking of making Aaron Davis the Prowler in this episode so we could introduce Miles Morales so he could become Spider-Man in maybe Season 4. But, it's just a little bit too early maybe, or, obviously they didn't have access to Miles Morales at the time. So, what's going to happen in this episode is going to be practically how Spider-Man, he isn't passing the torch, but Spider-Man is teaching someone with great power comes great responsibility, just as Uncle Ben taught him. And this time it's going to be the Prowler. So just like Black Cat, the Prowler is going to become an ally of Spider-Man in this episode. It's going to be a great power comes great responsibility episode. And also, just to further develop a subplot, Peter and Gwen are finally going to start dating in this episode. Finally, after 3 seasons, Peter and Gwen are together. Then we get to episode 12, which I have dubbed Back to Green. So basically this is going to be the final 2-episode arc, also just tie into episodes 8, 9, and 10. And basically this episode arc will be about, basically the Green Goblin is once again back. Just like season 2, the Green Goblin does in fact return. Spider-Man fights the Goblin, and also Harry, who is the Green Goblin this time, who's actually the real Green Goblin, because obviously Norman Osborn was the Green Goblin in the first 2 seasons, and Harry was rumoured to be the Goblin, and obviously was framed for being the Goblin in the first season, but in this season, Harry's actually finally going to become the Green Goblin, and because he's on a constant downfall, obviously he blames Spider-Man for his father's death. He's obviously blamed Donald Mencken for a couple of things. He doesn't like Donald Mencken, and obviously he ultimately wants to destroy Oscorp, and he wants to destroy Spider-Man, and also Gwen has at this point broke up with him because she's going to be dating Peter, and this just pushes him over the edge. Harry does actually find out that Peter is Spider-Man, also strengthening his hatred towards Spider-Man and him now hating Peter Parker. And this obviously does make him hate him a lot more because obviously Gwen broke up for Harry for Peter. So Harry absolutely hates Peter at this point, as obviously he's the one who killed his father, stole his girlfriend, the lot. So Harry is completely pushed over the edge. Episode 13 rolls around. This will be the finale for Season 3. I've dubbed this episode Friendships. The main reason because it's basically an episode solely focusing on Peter Parker, aka Spider-Man, versus Harry Osborn, aka the new Goblin, or the Green Goblin, whichever one you want to call him. So obviously, Peter in this episode finds out that Harry is actually the Goblin this time, who's the actual Goblin. It's not Norman Osborn. He finds out that it's actually Harry Osborn. Obviously, he was guessing, just like in Season 2. He knew it couldn't be Norman Osborn because he was dead, and he knew it couldn't be Donald Mencken because Donald Mencken was the Hobgoblin and is now in jail. But it's actually Harry this time. So it's Harry versus Peter. And Peter and Harry fight to the death. Fight to the bitter end. Harry Osborn ultimately dies in this episode. So just like his father in the Season 2 finale, Season 3 finale, Harry Osborn dies as the Green Goblin once again. So it's basically the Goblin curse, I'd say. And he dies in the hands of Peter Parker. And Peter has no choice but to kill him, because if he doesn't, the Goblin will go on to do more terrible things. Peter tells Gwen at the end of the episode that he is ultimately Spider-Man. And that's how we end the season. Peter telling Gwen that he is Spider-Man. Peter is going to be dealing with Harry's death. So if you remember at the end of Season 3, I said that Harry died. And basically he will lose all hope. It'll be like kind of a Spider-Man No More type of story, where he's, he's had to kill his best friend. And, he's kind of, in the dumps right now. But Gwen will actually remind him that being Spider-Man, is a good thing. And he has to carry on being Spider-Man because that's what, the city needs Spider-Man, basically. And this is going to be quite a gritty episode. And quite a lot of the season is very, very gritty of what I've actually jotted down. If you guys thought Season 3 was gritty, Season 4 is... oh my god, just wait and see. So pretty much Gwen will remind him. These two are actually dating at this point. If I will remind you guys, remember that Gwen and Peter are actually dating at this point. And that's one of the reasons why Harry became the Goblin and did in fact die, and Peter had to kill him. So Peter and Gwen continue as interns at ESU under Miles Warren. So if you remember in Season 1 and 2, Gwen especially, Peter kind of got kicked out, but Gwen was an intern at ESU under Dr. Connors, and now because Miles Warren owns the lab, them two are going to continue as interns there, and that ties into a story in this season. You'll just have to wait. So episode 2 I've titled Kraven's Last Hunt Part 1. Now I must say that obviously the Kraven's Last Hunt is very, very graphic, and because this is a TV show and kids may be watching it, you can't have Kraven kill himself like he actually does in the comic. So this will be a variation of the story. I've called it Kraven's Last Hunt just because the story is very, very familiar to it and takes very big plot points from the actual story from the comics, but it won't be directly from the comics. I'm going to take out the whole killing himself part. That bit's not going to be in this storyline. So Kraven will escape jail with the help of his wife. Now, the reason I put this in here is because obviously Calypso is his wife, and it's just a way to get Kraven out of jail, because, I mean, he's in jail at this point. He becomes obsessed with Spider-Man once again, because obviously he's got a motive to want to kill Spider-Man because, Spider-Man's put him away twice. He defeats him and buries him alive, just like in the comics, you know. He defeats him, he'll probably put him unconscious, he won't kill him, and he'll bury him alive. And at this point, obviously, we know Kraven is going to go on a hunt, well, hunt in quotation marks, but he's going to try and be better than Spider-Man. So episode 3 rolls around, and it's called Kraven's Last Hunt Part 2, obviously. Kraven dresses up as Spider-Man and stops crime. And Kraven actually does mess up as Spider-Man, and this is where basically the story takes a different turn than it does in the comics. So basically Kraven messes up as Spider-Man, but is doing a better job, but messes up once and is destroying Spider-Man's reputation, like just really bad. His reputation is becoming really bad. Kraven is messing up his reputation, and he tries to fix it by stopping more crime, trying to be better than Spider-Man, proving that he's the better Spider-Man. And then Spider-Man tries to stop him because he knows that Kraven is probably going to mess up his reputation even more. Kraven becomes infuriated, and they battle, and basically Kraven is then put away forever. He goes back to prison, and that is basically Kraven's last hunt, because this is the last time we're going to ever see Kraven, so technically the title does kind of fit the story, but yeah, that's basically Kraven's last hunt. Episode 4 rolls around, and I've titled this Return of Black Cat. This is going to be a 1-episode storyline, so this is going to be a 1-episode arc. Just like in Season 3, we had like 2 1-episode arcs that didn't really tie into the whole season. This is going to be one of them in this season. It's going to be called Return of Black Cat. And because obviously after Season 3, Season 4's took a very different tone and a very different vibe, and you'll definitely see that through the next storyline that I've got coming up. But basically this episode will basically just be a nod back to the first 2 seasons where it was more lighthearted. And basically Doc Ock in this episode is going to hatch a plan to finally destroy Spider-Man. So, you know, he wants him out the picture. He's still got hope that he can still be the big man of crime, which has been pretty much the main like villain of pretty much all the seasons in Spectacular Spider-Man. Apart from the Green Goblin, the big man of crime has been the big talking point, you know? He hosts an event that will sell some kind of tech like the one that Kingsley bet on in Season 2, that tech that Oscorp actually created. He knew that Spider-Man would come along for it and trying to stop him, but guess what? So did Black Cat. Black Cat is going to try and steal it. Spider-Man is actually, you know, he falls into the trap, and Black Cat is actually caught in the crossfire as well. So basically Spider-Man and Black Cat are forced to settle their differences, if you remember at the end of Season 2, and work together to escape from Doc Ock. So basically they are going to have to settle their differences, and because they actually kind of don't like each other, well, Black Cat doesn't really like Spider-Man, they have to settle their differences to escape Doc Ock, and that's exactly what they do. So basically they defeat Doc Ock, and Doc Ock goes to prison once and for all, and Black Cat and Spider-Man go their separate ways. I just thought it's a really cool way to incorporate Black Cat and just show that she's still out there. Then episode 5 rolls around. You guys may love it or you hate it. I've titled it The Clone Saga Part 1. So this is where this story takes a turn for the very dark, and it's going to get very, very gritty out from here. So basically Miles Warren has found a way to perfect the cloning human process. So he can clone a human at will. All he needs is just a strand of DNA. So he wants to test it out on Spider-Man, because Spider-Man, you know, he's basically a genetically modified human. And imagine having multiple Spider-Men. That would be so cool. So Miles Warren wants to test it on Spider-Man. So basically, this gives him the motivation to become the Jackal, which is actually a comic book villain. If you guys don't know who he is, he's basically like a C-grade villain. Not many people know who he is, unless you've actually read the original Clone Saga comics. Basically, the Jackal and Spider-Man fight, and basically the Jackal escapes with a piece of Spidey's costume that got ripped off, so DNA. So then obviously he creates the clone. Episode 6 rolls around, and that's called The Clone Saga Part 2. Miles clones obviously Spider-Man and finds out that Peter Parker is Spider-Man. And the reason this is important is because obviously remember, Peter and Gwen are still interns at ESU, where Miles Warren runs the lab, you know, ESU. So basically, now Miles Warren knows that his intern is Spider-Man. Miles becomes obsessed with Spider-Man, knowing that it's one of his interns. He asks for a one-on-one conversation with Peter Parker, and then he reveals to Peter that he is the Jackal, and the Jackal and Spider-Man actually do fight. The Jackal escapes, however, and the clone escapes as well, but still has Peter's memories. Episode 7 rolls around, and that's called The Clone Saga Part 3. Spider-Man and the Jackal have their final battle, in which the Jackal is killed when ESU actually does explode. The clone goes into hiding, knowing that he shouldn't interfere with the real Peter Parker's life. The clone becomes Ben Reilly, and Ben, obviously from Uncle Ben, and Riley from Aunt May's maiden name. That's how Ben Reilly's name actually came to be, guys, if you didn't know that. And as far as Peter knows, the clone of him died in the explosion along with the lab. Then episode 8 rolls around, and this is titled Back from the Dead. Norman Osborn does return. If you guys do remember, at the end of season 2, Norman Osborn actually was alive, and this time he actually returns after taking a little break and regathering his thoughts as a different identity. He actually does return to New York, and he covers up his death, saying that the Goblin actually did keep him captive, and he only just returned. But remember, the city doesn't actually know who the Green Goblin is. The only people that knew Norman was the Goblin were Harry and Peter Parker, and Harry is dead. So obviously Spidey, as he does, confronts Norman. Norman tells Spider-Man that he knows that he is Peter Parker. So basically this is going to be a big problem for Spider-Man. Norman has been gathering his thoughts, and he's actually realised and found out with a lot of evidence that Peter Parker is Spider-Man. And Norman is smart about this. He tells Spider-Man that he is Peter Parker and just goes over all the Oscorp buy in his whole origin story pretty much in this episode, and this sets up a brand new rivalry between Norman Osborn and Spider-Man, and the only reason Norman actually did return to New York was to kill Spider-Man. He wants to kill him. You know, there's no other motive. Norman just wants to kill Spider-Man. So Peter doesn't have any evidence to expose Norman as the Goblin, however, so that leaves Peter in a tough situation. He just has to wait for Norman to move first. So Norman can literally sit back for years on end and not do anything, and Peter can't expose him as the Goblin. So Peter has to wait for the Goblin to make his move first, which in the long run has very, very big effects on Peter, playing mind games with him and so on and so forth. So episode 9 rolls around. This is titled Maximum Carnage. So basically, Cletus Kasady is actually thought to have had rid of the symbiote. And also, Peter is on high alert because of Norman. Just want to put that out there again. So basically, the symbiote bonded with him on a cellular level. So Cletus becomes Carnage and actually does break out of prison. So pretty much, Carnage has been waiting for the perfect opportunity, and Cletus realizes that, you know, the symbiote actually did bond with him on a cellular level, so he doesn't actually need the real symbiote, and he becomes Carnage and breaks out of prison. Spider-Man fights Carnage, and basically Ben Reilly at this point realizes that Spider-Man needs help, because remember in the War of the Symbiote storyline last season, in season 3, if you do remember, Spider-Man had to team up with Venom to take down Carnage, and Spider-Man can't defeat him on his own. So basically, Ben Reilly realizes that Spider-Man needs his help, so dawns his own version of Spider-Man, the Scarlet Spider. So Peter finds out that the clone is alive, and Spider-Man and the Scarlet Spider take down Carnage. The Carnage symbiote is relieved of Kasady, but then bonds to Ben Reilly, the clone, to create Spider Carnage. Now, obviously, in the comics, Ben Reilly, at this point when Spider Carnage comes about, is basically the real Spider-Man. He isn't, you know, he isn't Scarlet Spider. He is the real Spider-Man, and Peter Parker isn't being Spider-Man anymore. Instead, Peter Parker is still being Spider-Man, but Ben Reilly actually does become Spider Carnage. And yeah, so basically, in episode 10, which I have dubbed Spider Carnage, Peter fights Spider Carnage, obviously. Peter realizes that he can't beat a Spider-Man with the Carnage symbiote, which is worse than a serial killer with the Carnage symbiote, surprisingly enough. So he gets through to Ben, reminding him of his past life, of Peter Parker, because obviously Ben Reilly still has the memories of Peter Parker. So Peter reminds Ben of Uncle Ben, of Aunt May, of Gwen, of everyone in his life, of Harry, you know, and then Ben actually does break through, just like we saw in the 90s cartoon series. If you guys do remember the episode with Spider Carnage in, Ben breaks free of the symbiote, but not fully. The symbiote still is on him. He can't get rid of it, but Ben has his own mind. Ben can think clearly without the symbiote controlling him, and he knows that if he waits longer, that the symbiote will take control again and basically just destroy the city. So basically, Ben sacrifices himself to save New York from Spider Carnage, killing Ben Reilly. So the clone of Peter Parker is now dead, and also the Carnage symbiote, just like the Venom symbiote in the last season, the Carnage symbiote is now dead, and that kills Ben Reilly, and Ben Reilly is now dead. The clone of Peter Parker is no more. Then we go into episode 11, which I have dubbed Juggernaut. So basically, this is back to the Norman storyline. Norman knows Peter will be on high alert, so he creates the Juggernaut to keep him busy whilst he conducts his plan to rid of Spider-Man forever. Spider-Man fights the Juggernaut, and obviously Spider-Man will come out on top, but at this point he is completely distracted from Norman Osborn, and Norman Osborn's just been sitting back in his chair waiting for the right moment. Then we go into episode 12, which I've titled The Wheel of Fortune, and basically the Green Goblin will return once again as Norman Osborn and messes with Peter's head, playing mind games with him and just doing all that kind of stuff, saying that he's going to kill someone in his life, he's going to kill him. And then the Goblin does in fact kidnap Gwen Stacy and takes her to the George Washington Bridge. And then you all know what's coming next. The Green Goblin, Norman Osborn, kills Gwen Stacy, and this is the Night of the Gwen Stacy death storyline. And basically, Norman Osborn kills Gwen Stacy, and Spider-Man is enraged. And that leads us straight to the final episode of Season 4, which I have dubbed The Last Stand. And this is a storyline where it ends off with episode 13, and it's basically just Peter Parker versus Norman Osborn. It basically picks up straight away where the last episode left off. Just, the last episode completely cuts off, and then episode 13 rolls around, and it's just Peter Parker absolutely infuriated with Norman Osborn. And in this episode, Peter Parker will kill Norman Osborn for good. He makes sure he's dead. Pretty much everyone else that has died in the Spectacular Spider-Man show has either sacrificed themselves or they've accidentally died. This time, Peter Parker will kill Norman Osborn as Spider-Man. And that's how the season ends. Peter Parker versus Norman Osborn in episode 13, The Last Stand. Norman Osborn is finally dead, but Peter Parker is responsible for his death for killing Gwen Stacy. Episode 1 is called Spider-Man No More. So basically, Peter is mourning over Gwen's death as he does, and just like in The Amazing Spider-Man 2, where Peter quits being Spider-Man, he does the same thing here, because he's just had enough of it, Too many people have died in his life, and he just quits being Spider-Man. Morris Bench, aka Maury, is a high schooler who is transferred to Midtown High, and is now a new student there. Peter starts to like MJ, because them two have become close friends after Gwen has died, and she has decided to comfort Peter. But the problem is, MJ starts to take an interest in Maury. Hardshell, a robot created by the Beetle, is terrorizing New York for an unknown reason. Captain Stacy tries to stop him and is almost killed in the process. Peter realizes that Gwen wouldn't want this for her father and remembers why he is Spider-Man. Spider-Man stops Hardshell in the end. Spider-Man has returned. Episode 2, which I have named Chaos. Juggernaut and Rhino escape jail and decide to team up to take down Spider-Man. Peter is having a hard time at school, Flash left him alone, but Harry and Gwen are gone. And MJ, who he became close with, is now took an interest in Maury instead of Peter. Peter then becomes friends with Frederick Myers, an exchange student from across the country. Frederick Myers likes sport, basketball, basically all sport, and he also has a hobby in boomerangs and is surprisingly good with them. Juggernaut and Rhino start to destroy the city, and Spider-Man stops them. In the process, Captain Stacy finds out that Peter Parker is Spider-Man. But the interesting thing about this is that Captain Stacy knew all along. You see, remember back in Season 1 and 2 where Captain Stacy would always let Peter go off and then Spider-Man would show up later? I feel like Captain Stacy would already know that Peter Parker is Spider-Man, so when he finds out in Season 5, it doesn't come as much as a surprise. Episode 3, which I have named Big Wheel. Big Wheel starts to rampage through the city. He has become corrupt with power. Spider-Man goes trying to stop him, but the Prowler is there as well. They both stop him, and Spider-Man finds out that Hobie Brown is the Prowler and that he was friends with the guy in the Big Wheel. MJ and Maury start dating. This upsets Peter, but Peter is suspicious about Maury as he gives him the villain vibe. So episode 3 was pretty much just a fill-in episode for the entire season. Episode 4 is called Entomophobia. MJ and Maury continue their relationship. Beetle goes into the Bugle to see who takes pictures of Spider-Man to try and track him down. Peter knows that it's his responsibility, so leaves school and goes to the Bugle as Spider-Man. Jameson won't tell him that Parker takes the pictures, but Beetle finds out anyway. Spider-Man saves J. Jonah Jameson despite JJ still hating Spider-Man. Beetle goes to the school and attacks it. Peter couldn't make it back in time to realize that Fred had been severely injured by a piece of rubble. Spider-Man fights the Beetle in one epic battle. We find out that the reason the Beetle wanted Spider-Man out of the picture is because he stopped him as a criminal in his early Spidey days. We then find out Beetle's origin, because Beetle has been a mysterious figure in the background ever since episode 1. He has released villains upon the city to try and distract Spider-Man while he conducts a big plan. Basically, Beetle's origin is that his family was in jeopardy. You know, he had people in hospital that he needed to pay bills for, he had no job, so resulted to becoming a criminal to get money for them. Unfortunately, Spider-Man mocked him and stopped him at the same time. Therefore, Beetle could not save some of his family members who are dying from terminal illnesses in hospital. Beetle then goes to jail for the crimes that he committed. Episode 5, which I have dubbed Rise of Hydra Man Part 1. One night, Spider-Man was out stopping criminals, but finds Maury talking to someone about a weapons deal going down at a ferry. Peter has his suspicions. Peter tries to convince MJ that Maury is dangerous. Maury and MJ go on a date to the ferry. MJ gets annoyed at Peter, playing him off as jealous, which he basically is at the same time. The next day, Peter follows MJ and Maury to the ferry. Peter stops Maury doing the deal away from MJ. Spider-Man stops him. In an attempt to escape, Maury falls over the edge of the boat with a weapon. The weapon explodes next to Maury in the water. The boat explodes, and Spider-Man rescues MJ, and Maury is now Hydra Man and goes after them. Episode 6, I've dubbed Rise of Hydra Man Part 2. Spider-Man tries to get MJ as far away as he can from Maury as he is chasing them down. Every time Spider-Man tries to engage in battle, Maury goes after MJ. All Maury wants is MJ at this point. It is developed into a little bit of an obsession. Yet, Maury is still really annoyed that Spider-Man basically turned him into Hydra Man. And with the help of Captain Stacy, Spider-Man stops Hydra Man, locking him up. MJ forgives Peter as she knew the truth about Maury. Episode 7, I have dubbed Speed Demon. Beetle is in jail and meets James Sanders, who is also another criminal, and a criminal mastermind when it comes to tactics. They team up and plan to escape with Beetle's knowledge in weaponry and James Sanders' knowledge in tactician. In the process, James is electrocuted and is knocked unconscious. However, Beetle escapes with James, and no one knowing where they went. Peter is worrying about Fred in the hospital though, and MJ is there to comfort him once again, with one of his friends almost on the brink of death. This then further develops their relationship, and it really shows how much Peter and MJ have grown throughout the series. As it turns out, James Sanders wakes up and has super speed, and turns into the criminal Speed Demon as he robs banks and stores, along with the Beetle. Speed Demon and the Beetle are once again defeated, and they are sent back to jail, where the Beetle and Speed Demon meet Montana, aka the Shocker. Episode 8, What Goes Around Comes Around. Now this episode is very similar to the Elektra episode that we saw in Season 1, except for instead of Max Dillon, we have Frederick Myers, who is also very close to Peter Parker. We learn that Fred needs a special suit to stay alive. Fred gets the suit and learns that he can't continue his normal life, so basically he becomes enraged. Spider-Man tries to stop him, but that gets him even more angry. Fred ends up throwing sharp boomerangs at Spider-Man that could have a lethal impact. Fred, now known as Boomerang, has a battle with Spider-Man. In this time, Peter develops his relationship with MJ as well. Also at the end of this episode, Beetle finally finds a way to escape with jail. After having many conversations with Montana and James Sanders, we don't know what he's planning, but Beetle is planning something big. Episode 9 is called Shadows. Beetle will be on the down low in this episode. This episode will be a Peter-based episode. After the last one, he had to take down his friend Fred. He will also develop his feelings towards Mary Jane and vice versa. At the end, Beetle has become fully obsessed with taking down Spider-Man and finds out by stalking him that his real identity is Peter Parker. Episode 10, Attack of the Spider Slayers, Part 1. We learn that Beetle has been hatching another plan to take down Spider-Man and has teamed up with an engineer known as Alistair Smythe. He designs Spider Slayers to take down Spider-Man. In the Peter side of things, he has a good job, Aunt May as well, and he started dating Mary Jane. So the Peter side of things right now are actually looking okay for once in his life. Episode 11, Attack of the Spider Slayers Part 2. As the Spider Slayers continue to attack Peter, he destroys most of them. Alistair Smythe designs an upgraded Spider Slayer to take down Spider-Man. Spider-Man becomes suspicious and tries to track them down. And then out of nowhere, Mary Jane goes missing. Peter is left really confused. Spider-Man finds property of Alistair Smythe on the back of one of the destroyed Spider Slayers, and using his detective skills, uses it to track down Smythe. Spider-Man finds out that it was once again the Beetle behind these attacks, and Smythe as well. Spider-Man also learns that Beetle has found out his true identity and that the Beetle was the one who took MJ in the first place. Spider-Man rescues Mary Jane, but in a heated battle with the Beetle, Mary Jane finds out that Peter Parker is Spider-Man. The Beetle escapes and so does Peter and MJ. Episode 12, Sinister Syndicate, Part 1. Mary Jane finding out that Peter was Spider-Man has only brought them closer. Their relationship develops out from here. However, Beetle is not done trying to take down Spider-Man and will stop at nothing until he does. He hatches his last and final plan, a variation of the previous Sinister Six, the Sinister Syndicate. The new Six contains Beetle as the leader, Rhino, Shocker, Boomerang, Speed Demon, and Juggernaut. So basically all the villains that we've seen previously in this season. It turns out while the Beetle was in jail, he had his last report planned out with Montana. Beetle goes on a complete rampage, breaking everyone out of prison. Spider-Man gets to the prison where he encounters the Six. They have their first battle and Spider-Man ultimately loses. Some of the villains like Rhino will proclaim that they should finish him, right there and then, but the Beetle would like to have a bit of fun with it. Episode 13, The Sinister Syndicate, Part 2. The Six then show up at Peter's house knowing he has an aunt. Peter calls Mary Jane to get Aunt May out of there. Mary Jane shows up at the Parker house with Captain Stacy and confronts the villains. SWAT teams surround the Six. Mary Jane gets Aunt May out of the house while the Six are distracted by the police. Aunt May has no idea what is going on. And then a beaten up, bruised, crushed, and almost defeated Peter Parker shows up at the house. The Rhino charges at him and Peter crushes his head with the car and says, "Who's next?" In the process, Aunt May finds out that her nephew is Spider-Man after all these years. The rest of them beat Peter to a pulp, and on the brink of death, before Beetle could land the final blow to the rival he has hated for so long, Captain Stacy sacrifices himself to save Peter Parker. Peter is enraged, knowing that his promise to Gwen was not fulfilled. Peter, regaining some strength, takes down every other member of the Six except for Beetle, them two standing opposite each other. In a heated last battle, Spider-Man finally defeats the Beetle, and he swears that the Beetle will never escape jail ever again. He continues his life, happily dating Mary Jane, and they eventually get married. Aunt May knows he's Spider-Man. Peter also graduates from high school and goes on to do stuff with science. He quits his job at the Daily Bugle and eventually gets a house with Mary Jane, and they eventually have a daughter who they call May Parker. Unlike most Spider-Man media, Peter Parker lives a great life after this. And I've got to say, for one superhero, that was most certainly a spectacular ride. So guys, that is the Spectacular Spider-Man Season 5. It is finally done. Yes, this is the final season. I will not be doing a Season 6. If you want me to do any more Spectacular Spider-Man content, for example, go in more depth to the seasons and explain why I made some of the choices I did, I will make videos like that. You're just going to have to request it in the comments below because that is very, very specific and I don't know what you guys will want. But also, I just want to say thank you so much for the support on these videos. It has been absolutely amazing, and I couldn't ask for more. Like, it's so cool how I can, like, make these for you guys, and you guys enjoy them. So hopefully, you have enjoyed all 3 seasons that I have made, and unfortunately, obviously, we didn't get the seasons from Sony, and it was very, very sad, you know, why they were cancelled, but here I am on the internet giving you what I think would have been my perfect 3-season storylines to finish off Spectacular Spider-Man. With that being said, thank you guys for watching this video. If you did enjoy, be sure to hit that like button, subscribe. If you want to, hit the bell notification button and next subscribe button to not miss any more content. And with that being said, once again, thank you guys for watching. I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.